instituted by different people, or things that changed that came with the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, first or second Beis Hamikdash, Bati Mikdashes. And the Gemara finishes off the Tractate Sotah, which is very famous, which is the idea of things that are going to happen in the days leading up to Mashiach. I mean, certain signs, and this is brought down in many places, not just in the Gemara of Sotah, but the Gemara of Sotah certainly shows us clearly certain signs of the days leading to Mashiach. And certain things you can see there are going to be changes in the world, and changes in society, and changes in the economic situation, wars, etc. We'll get to them. I'm not sure this class, maybe next class, but we'll get to them. Depending how fast we go. Okay, but first we're going to actually start in the middle of the Talmud's discussion about certain things that were changed by Yochanan Kohen Gadol. Now, who is Yochanan Kohen Gadol? Yochanan Kohen Gadol is a very interesting person, because Yochanan Kohen Gadol is from the family of the Chashmonaim. He is from the Maccabees, a descendant of them. And is the text coming up? You have the text?
Black. I got it.
You got it? Okay. So there's Yochanan Kohen Gadol is from the family of the Chashmonaim, and he's also, I'm not so sure why we don't have it over here. Hold on. Oh, here we go. And he's also a Kohen Gadol for a very long time, 80 years. He's 80 years Kohen Gadol, high priest. Initially, he starts off as a following the footsteps, so to say, of the Maccabees, his forefathers, Matisyahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol, depending if Matisyahu himself was a Kohen Gadol or if his father was a Kohen Gadol. And he goes sour towards the end of his life after 80 years of service, and he joins the Tzedokim, and he's from then onwards, the house of the Chashmonaim is no longer what we would say the keepers of Torah, and eventually bring war and destruction that eventually leads to the destruction of the Second Temple, as we're going to learn here in Sotah, where the inner struggles that they had with each other, bringing Rome into the equation, very similar to things that could be happening nowadays, where when you bring in the big beer to side with you, then you take what it comes with it. And a lot of times there's consequences. And that's what happened in the Second Temple that eventually led to the destruction of the Second Temple. But in his days before Yochanan Gadol kind of goes sour, he made a lot of Takonos. He instituted a lot of ideas that were with us for were very important to the survival, actually, of the Jewish people. One of the things he did was, before we go to the things in the text, one of the things he did is he instituted a thing called Demai. Demai is, at his times, the people no longer were trustworthy to tithe. And he felt that people were cooling off on the idea of properly giving the tithings, and because of that, tithings, trumas, and meisers, and because of that, specifically the meiser we're talking about, because truma everyone was giving, which is to the Kohen, but the meiser which was going either to the Levite or depending on how it happened in the Second Temple. He decided that we no longer could trust a regular person who's not considered a scholar or someone that's God-fearing or proved himself or herself to be trustworthy. And therefore, if you buy something in the supermarket, you have to give tithings again. You have to give meiser again, because unless you know for sure, and there's certain signs that this person is trustworthy. Okay. So now he instituted something else. The Gemara tells like this: "V'afu bitel sama'orim." He nullified the awakeners. The word ma'orer means to wake up. He stopped those who are the awakeners. What does that mean? My ma'orim. What does it mean, the awakeners? Amar Rachava. So Rachava, who's a person, he says like this: "B'chol yoyim v'yoyim sheyoimdim leviyim ale duchen v'oimrim ura lo masishin Hashem." So you have to remember, Second Temple is not the first temple, and there's lacking of the miracles, as we're going to learn soon. Even the clothing of the Kohen Gadol wasn't in its full form of activity. And so one of the things that the Levites would say in their songs getting by the temple would be, Ura lama sishin Hashem, awake, why do you sleep, O Lord? Basically telling God to get up. So that seemingly was, the Levites were saying that in the temple, until Yochanan Kohen Gadol. Again, Yochanan Kohen Gadol, he was very long. He was a Kohen Gadol for a long time. What point he instituted this, we don't know. But we're talking about towards the end of the Second Temple. So Amr Lehen, so Yochanan Kohen Gadol turns to the Levites and he says, does God slumber? Does God sleep? Everyone knows the song, right? That behold, that keeps Israel, the keeper means the Shomer Yisrael, the one who keeps Israel, the God, neither slumbers nor sleeps. So how could you say God wake up? He doesn't sleep. He's never sleeping. He's always watching the Jewish people. Ella, Bizman Yisrael Shruyim B'tzar, when the Jewish people are in pain, V'umas Ha'olam B'nachas V'shalva. So the point is that when the Jewish people are in a state of suffering, and the nations are in a state of calm, and they're ruling over the Jewish people. So in such a situation, then you say, why is God sleeping? Wake up for the Jewish people. But seemingly, as Rabbi Steinsaltz continues, is that Yochanan Kohen Gadol felt it was wrong for them to say it in this situation.
Who were the ruling? The sleeping people.
God. They would the ones who would tell God to wake up. They were the ones who would call God to be wakeful. He shouldn't slumber. He should wake up.
Seems to be like an organized group, like
the Levites.
All the Levites?
The ones who were doing the song, the singing on the Duchen. So he said that was inappropriate at the time of the Second Temple, even if they're had reasons to say so. That's only a time when the Jewish people are not in a really good situation. But at the time of the Second Temple, you can't make it as if it's nothing. There's a Second Temple. There's no Golus. There's no exile, and they shouldn't be saying, "God, wake up." God wasn't sleeping. That they were doing that? Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, he stopped it quite a bit earlier before, because you have to remember, Yochanan Kohen Gadol, his son was, I believe, Yanai HaMelech, and then was Shlomo Tzion, and then was the sons who brought in the Romans, and then came Herod. So you're talking about at least 150 or so years before the destruction of the Second Temple. But as we know, things don't move fast as it seems. There's the decrees happen way before things actually actualized. I don't think that was they contributed it to, but definitely wasn't positive. Okay, now that's one thing he stopped. Another thing he stopped was the Nokfim. The Nokfim, the Gemara says, what's the Nokfim? So the strikers.
Where's the word?
What do you mean?
Nokfim, I don't see it.
So you're looking at right here. That's a Nokfim. Okay. So what are the Nokfim? Those are who strike. What does it mean they strike? What were they striking? What are you talking about? So you have to remember something. You have to take ourselves back to the times of the temple. The temple times was the mindset of society, not just of the people of Eretz Yisrael, but society. There was a lot of things that could be looked upon as if Jews were doing things similar to how people were worshiping in idols. So there was a lot of concern that the people were doing things that were mimicking idol worship, even if it wasn't straight up idol worship. You have to remember something. The Jewish people didn't suffer from idol worship in the Second Temple. That wasn't one of the struggles that they had, because it's brought down in the Gemara, I think, that the members of the Great Assembly, after the destruction after the rebuild of the beginning of the rebuilding of the Second Temple, I think we discussed this once, got active, and they actually conquered the evil inclination for idol worship, and they killed it. So we no longer struggle with idol worship like we once did. So therefore, kind of, there was a little bit of concern, but not as much as maybe in the First Temple. Again, this comes back later in another thing that we're going to learn about in a few minutes. So Maya Noikvim, what are the Noikvim? Who are the strikers? Rav Yehuda Shmuel. Shahayu Misartin le'egel ben Karnov kedei sheyipol dam be'enov. They would kind of scratch the cow or the calf that was being taken to slaughter for the Beis HaMikdash. They would scratch it, and then the blood would come, drip into the eyes of the calf, blind the calf, and therefore the calf would not be aware of what's about to happen, which is that it's going to the slaughterhouse. You have to remember something else. I don't know if anyone's ever been to a slaughterhouse, a slaughterhouse for kosher. It's not a pretty scene, and it's intense. I used to go there as a child. Maybe they've upped their game, but when I was going in the 80s in Seattle when they were doing a shechita, it was unpleasant. It was the animals weren't just being led to slaughter, like we said. So especially the cows, the sheep less. So they didn't want that there should be hysteria in the temple. So they would scratch above the eyes, the blood would drip down. The cows weren't able to see, the calves were not able to see what was happening, and therefore they would become. So Asaihu Batal, he didn't think that was the right thing to do. Why? It looks like they're blemishing the animal, even though it wasn't enough. It wasn't a cut that was deep enough to cause it to be a disqualification. It was just a scratch, but it could look as if they're causing a blemish that would disqualify.
Perfect.
Okay, it's perfect. The definition of perfect is not as you would think perfect. Every animal has scratches and things on it. So it depends if it's scratched or damaged enough to be considered halachically a blemish. Okay, so what did he do? So that's one thing he stopped. He didn't want them to do that. Masnisa Tana, another thing that we learned that they would do is shahayu chayftin oisei b'matles. They would strike the animals with sticks, as they would do before in the houses of idol worship. And why would they hit it with sticks? They hit it with sticks also to submit that the animal should go to slaughtering. So he thought again that was something that was too similar to idol worship, and therefore he said to them, how long are you going to continue to feed the mizbeach with unslaughtered animals, meaning animals that are not qualified for the temple? You're hitting it with sticks. The Gemara says it wasn't unslaughtered. They slaughtered the animals. And the treifus, they're considered a treifa. Now, I want to say something about the law. A lot of people may not know this. I actually heard a shir about this. Maybe when you go to the store, right? I just had milk now. You go to the store in Eretz Yisrael, or anyway, and you get what's called chol v'yisrael milk. So everyone says, what's the difference? Why do I have to buy mahadrim milk? It says if it's tenuva, it's chol v'yisrael. And we find that there's the mahadrin and non-mahadrin. So what are the differences? There are a few differences. I heard a class. One of the differences is that we have to make sure that the animal is not a treifa. Treifa means, what's the word treif? We always say treif, chazir treif. Actually, the language chazir treif is it doesn't make sense. Chazir is a non-kosher animal. A treif means that the animal is a treif. A treif, but the actual treifa means that it was attacked by a lion or an animal that would cut through it and cause enough damage for the animal to be so sick that it won't be able to live out 12 months. So if you have a treifa, today it's not just an animal attacking it. That's what we have. It's called black kosher. Black kosher is the same question. Are the growths on the lungs a sign that the animal is not healthy? Actually, if you come to think of it, the more kosher the meat is, let's say glat versus non-glat, the more healthy cow you're eating or animal you're eating, because a glat kosher cow means it has no growths. It doesn't have at least the growths that are considered halachically questionable to make it an animal that wasn't healthy. Today also there's a question, and there's opinions that the antibiotics they're giving animals today, the cows, could be causing it to be a treifa, and therefore the milk is called chalif treifa. And you're taking milk from, so they're giving the cow milks these antibiotics, and some way of giving to them, whether it's the puncturing of the needles or the antibiotics themselves, are causing the cow to be a treifa, and therefore you're eating milk that could possibly be disqualified for kosher. Now, which would make it actually worse than almost in ways than a chalavakum, than a cow that was milked by a non-Jew. Okay, but either way, so he said that by banging the cow with the sticks, what were they doing? They were damaging the cow. They were banging it on its head. They could have, if the head is punctured, if the skull is punctured, it's also a treifa. Anything that would cause the animal to bleed or to die out eventually would make it unkosher. So here they're beating the cows to submit them to slaughter, and then at the same time they're causing the animal to become a treifa. Shema nika b'krum moshamayach. Maybe the membrane of the head of the cow is going to be punctured, and therefore it's going to cause it to be a non-kosher animal, not a treif animal. Ahmad v'hisklem tabas b'karka. Now I don't know. I heard, I was here before a few times, and I heard you guys getting classes in the in the Beis Hamikdash, right? You have a Beis Hamikdash class you're getting over here of the setup of the Beis Hamikdash.
Today.
Okay, so if you look at the pictures in the Beis Hamikdash today, the pictures will show that near the altar, he had these half rings that were kind of, I guess, drilled into the ground of the base of the temple. It's actually interesting because they don't do that today. And they would do is they would put the cow's head or the animal's head into the ring, and that ring, once it goes in, I guess the animal is harder for it to get it out, and that would hold the cow to be positioned. And they would actually slaughter it when the cow is on the ground. So the cow is on the ground, his head is in the ring, and again on the floor on the ring, and then they were able to slaughter it in the animal. So then he instituted that. So up until his days, they didn't have these rings. He instituted to have these rings so that the Jewish people, so the people shouldn't be banging the cows with sticks that could cause the cow to puncture the membrane of the cow. Okay, these are different things that Rabbi Yochanan Kohen Gadol did. Another thing he did, which actually wouldn't be a bad idea if he took it on today. Ad Yamav Hayipatish Makabish Laim B'Chol Shmoed. We know that you're not allowed to work on Chol Hamoed, right? The days in between the first and last day of a holiday, we're talking about Sukkot and Pesach. So Chol Hamoed, you're not allowed to do work. It's not exactly holiday, but you're not supposed to do work unless you have certain conditions. But for more details, study the laws of Chol Hamoed. But in general, you're not supposed to work. But until his days, they were banging the hammer, which means some sort of construction was allowed. I think this year Pesach, they put out an announcement that there will be no drilling in Yerushalayim in Chol Hamoed. Like, you walk and you go downtown, you hear bam, 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 all the drilling. So they said there's going to be no drilling in Yerushalayim in honor of Yom Tov, so people could have a relaxed Chag. Anyone who lives in town is woken up every morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, or whenever they start with the drilling. So he instituted this idea that there's no knocking of the hammer on Chol Hamoed. Let people relax. That it breaks the spirit of the Yom Tov. Evidently, we don't hold of it so strong anymore because we.
Well, the prayer certainly is lovely.
Say that again.
The call to prayer.
That's something you guys hear here. That's something you hear in the Old City. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know, but that would be obviously that's another deeper conversation. Then another thing the Gemara says that Kol Yamav Lo Hayu Adam Tzarich Lishal Al Dmai. That's something we spoke before, that he was able to make it that the Meiser, the tithing system, he fixed it by having the people that weren't scholars to have to you would have to tithe from them again. So therefore you didn't ask. If you bought from someone that didn't have a hechsher, you had to do second tithing yourself. Okay. That's what we learn about Yochanan Kohen Gadol. Okay. I want to continue. This is actually maybe, Ronnie, something in your field. We're going to continue. This is a very complicated question. It's not. I don't have enough experience. Maybe the Rabbi will help us a bit about the laws of music today. Everyone's. We don't really find that people are conscious of the prohibition that we're going to learn about now, not to participate in live music. And actually, I checked into Reb Moshe Feinstein. Seems to pass until today that a gathering that's not a mitzvah, a wedding's a mitzvah, bar mitzvah is a mitzvah. But if you're not at a mitzvah, he even said he made it that you shouldn't even have live music at a school dinner, even if it's a fundraiser. He says it's a fundraiser. It's not a mitzvah. I mean, it's not a Sudas mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to get stuck, but it's not Sudas mitzvah. But since the destruction of the temple, or actually since the fall of Sanhedrin, which happened a little later, there's no we don't have music. We shouldn't have music, live music anymore. We shouldn't have singing. So it's not so clear why when we have
talking about again.
No, we're not talking anytime. Now it's not so much a destruction of mourning of the destruction of the temple as much as it's that the Sanhedrin were able to exercise authority. And as long as they were functioning, there was a level of authority that the Rabbanim, so to say, the Sanhedrin, were able to make sure that the live music didn't get out of control, because live music could be, as we know today, with MTV and all these things, have become extremely inappropriate. And so it was maybe something that they were vulnerable in those days as well. And the Sanhedrin were able to keep some sort of check on that. when the Sanhedrin was no longer functioning, there was a concern that feasts and so let's get there. Okay. Mishabatul Sanhedrin. So the Mishnah says like this: from when the Sanhedrin was nullified. Again, the Sanhedrin lasted, I have to check exact date, but the Sanhedrin definitely lasted through Rabbi, because at least, Rabbi Gamliel, we talked about the Yavna was after the destruction of the temple. Batal Hashir mi Beis HaMishtais. Ceased songs from a place of feast, a meal, like a dinner. Now, maybe it could be that the reason why we have that a concert is not included in that, because it's not a feast. As it says, B'shir la yishtu yayin. With song they shall not drink wine. Wine is what you drink at a feast. When you're drinking wine at a feast, which basically would be, I don't know if anyone's ever been to sports games, college sports games. I don't know if they changed the rule. When I was a kid, at a college sports game, you couldn't buy alcohol, right? If you go to an NFL game, you could buy, or a basketball game, NBA game, you could buy beer or whatever. But you're not allowed, they don't serve alcohol at college sports. So so there's no wine, so it's less of an event. But if you have wine, it's a concern that the wine will lead on to inappropriate behavior. So when the Sanhedrin was nullified, they nullified the ability or the idea of people having a music at a feast. A party. Well, let's just learn one of Rabbi Steindal's footnotes over here. The Jerusalem Talmud offers other reasons not derived from the Bible, because he brings a pasuk here from Yeshaya Navi that says, for this halacha, one explanation is that the authority of the Sanhedrin was sufficient to make sure people do not sing songs with bad lyrics that were not inappropriate at parties with wine. After the dissolution of the Sanhedrin, the sages saw that people were singing improper songs, inappropriate, and at these parties, and consequently banned them entirely. So they said, you know what? We're not going to let you sing and then have to be worried that you're going to lead to something negative. No more music at feasts. The Gemara there, meaning the Jerusalem Talmud, also adds, and the time of the Sanhedrin, the sages would institute additional days of rejoicing when the Jewish people were safe from trouble. Once that Sanhedrin was dissolved, these days could no longer be instituted, so there was no more basically adding days of festivities. He ends up quoting from the Shulchan Aruch, the Bach, which is an authority in the Shulchan Aruch, is actually very machmir, not even to sing. Not only, you have a gramin, or he doesn't want anything. No singing, no music, not just the questions if it's just instruments or if it's also instruments with singing. The Bach is very careful, and the halacha reckons with his opinion, meaning that even the Mishnah Brura says, even though we're a little more lenient, but a machmer, someone should be machmer. Clearly, Moshe Feinstein said that dinners should not have music unless it's a mitzvah. What?
There's no humming, they eat something, and then when the
That's what they do now?
What?
By dinners?
You have to bench and then right?
And then you have music?
It's like people could be humming.
You mean singing the benching?
Or singing.
Oh, no. So we're going to see that there's different laws when we're talking about okay, that's then the next footnote from Rabbi Stein Johnson. The sages decreed that one may not play musical instruments or anything that produces the sound of music intended for enjoyment. Included some opinions. There are more rights that some authorities hold that the prohibition applies only to people such as kings and who habitately listen to music in a kind of a more aggressive way. In addition, the prohibition with regard to drinking houses is also prohibited to listen to such instruments in general. These prohibitions are in commemoration of the destruction of the temple. Okay, so here he brings it down as a way of the destruction of the temple, less than an idea of concern of lewd behavior. For the same reason, it is prohibited even to sing, even without instruments while drinking wine. The Bach, again, in accordance to the Gemara, rules stringently that one may not sing even if he's not drinking wine. The custom throughout all of Israel is to sing and recite praises over wine to express thanks for the kindness of Hashem. So therefore, when it comes to thanking Hashem, singing, that's why there's some people, by the way, who if you listen to the music of a lot of today's modern singers, Jewish singers, it's all psukim, based on the fact that it's psukim. So they use that as a leniency because they're singing praises of Hashem. Or the English songs today are all about praising of Hashem. But a love song that's not based on Torah mitzvahs and not based on praising Hashem, it seems from the Bach, it's clearly prohibited to have such music today. If singing is performed for the sake of a mitzvah, such as the piece of for circumcision or at a wedding or a bar mitzvah, so then it's permitted according to the Ramah. Okay. Now the Gemara continues. This is all the Mishnah. What's very interesting about our history is that what do you feel is like the height of the Jewish people? Like, when do you say, like, this is what it was about? This is what, Avram was about. This is what the Jewish people going to Egypt, getting out of Egypt, getting Torah. What would you say was like our high point? Like, this was the vision that we were trying to get to. What do you think that time is?
Hashem is one.
No, I'm saying in our history. When would you think the time is that, right? God talks to Avram, he promises this. Moshe Rabbeinu, we're going to leave, we're going to go into land. What was the dream time that did we ever reach the dream or the promise, so to say, from Hashem? Okay, Matan Torah, we were in the desert. We had a long way to go until our destination. We're going to the land.
Yeah, but we were all prophets.
Okay, that's okay. That's
We went to the moon.
Okay, some people would say that it's the generation of David and Shlomo. David, Shlomo, like 13, 14, 15 generation of the Jewish people. After that, there was a decline, because we learned last week, remember we learned last time, that even after Shlomo Melech, he split the kingdom and led to the north kingdom, which went to idol worship. Even the south kingdom of David was on and off. They had good kings, not such good kings, and led to the destruction of the temple. And the second temple was never like the first temple. So if you wanted to say, like, of all the prophecies and all the promises, when was like that time of, like, you could say this is what God was talking about? It was very few years. And in the 3,000 years that were around, it was maybe 40, 50 years. I mean, you had pockets of good times, but like you could say that this is like the Jewish people were really this is the promise that all the promises that are that God spoke about was the beginning of Solomon's times. At some point, David for sure had some sort of kind of, and maybe even Shmuel, but before Shmuel, the Judges wasn't great, and after the Shlomo wasn't great. So you had pockets of years of times, but not like the height was David HaMelech and Shlomo.
No.
So this leads us to our Mishnah. It says Mishameisu Neviim Harishonim. So here we have everyone. We just learned this Shabbos about we dedicated the Mishkan, and the parashas before that we learned about getting ready for the Mishkan, and then Vayikra we learned about the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. So one of the clothing we all learned about is the Urim V'Tumim. The Urim V'Tumim was, we're not sure what it is, but it was some sort of clothing point that gave prophecy or answers to the Jewish people. Some people, the vision that we have is the stones lighting up. It's not, we're not so sure. There's many opinions of what happened. Rashi, the simple thing we have Rashi is that they wrote God's name on a parchment and placed it in the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, and through that they got answers. But the Urim V'Tumim was something that the Jewish people used clearly in Moshe's times, in Joshua's times, that they would use to get God to speak to the Jewish people. It was more than prophecy, but it was basically answers. You had questions. What do we do? Right? We always have questions. What do we do? Who goes first? What do we do? How do we fight this war? Do we fight this war? Don't we fight this war? What's the plan? So a prophecy comes to you, but here you had a question. So you asked God, and He answered you. That was the Urim V'Tumim. You got answers from God. So here, but how long did that function? You get the answers as well, Ronnie?
It's like the argument about Mr. Trump. I just think that he's God's guy, and I don't think it's going to disappoint anybody. But okay.
Oh, okay. That's it. So how long did the Urim V'Tumim function? It's a little depressing because it didn't function that long. It definitely wasn't in the Second Temple. There's a lot of discussion. The Rambam, Ibn Ezra, Rashi, if how much it was connected to the breastplate and the apron, the ephod, and if the conventional understanding is that in the Second Temple we had all the physical clothing, but we didn't have the functionality of the Urim V'Tumim. From our Mishnah here, we learned that could have been possible. It wasn't even in the times of the first temple. It could have been it stopped to work even before the temple went up. It says, Mishamesu Nevi'im HaRishonim, when the initial prophets passed away, Batul Urim V'Tumim, the Urim V'Tumim was no longer functional. The question is, who are these first prophets? We don't know who the first prophets are. We're going to discuss who are these first prophets. Mishachar Beis HaMikdash, another thing. When the destruction of the temple, Batul HaShomer, the HaShomer was I was speaking to Rabbi Avidan a few weeks ago. He says it was a magical worm, or not magical, or just a supernatural worm that basically Shlomo Melech used to cut the stones. It was a small worm, and he used it to cut the stones of the temple, because you weren't allowed to use of the mizbeach. You weren't allowed to use metal. So this shamir, which was a small, so the Gemara actually talks about how did they carry it. If it breaks through, it's like how do you contain it? Like, I mean, if you want to take it around, if it's breaking through stone, what is it? How could you cage it? You can't cage it. So the Gemara actually discusses that. They had a special system how to cage it, but that whole shamir stopped functioning with the destruction. I'm assuming. Let's see what Rabbi Steinzel says. It says the first temple, and second temple, second temple. The second temple was destroyed. Okay, I didn't know that they had it in the second temple. B'noifes tupim, and also very sweet honey combs that was around stopped. They didn't have it anymore. Also, we're going to learn later in the Gemara, not now, maybe next class, that if we have another class, that there was a lot of different dishes and drinks, special wines, the color of the sky. The world changed. I mean, you have to remember something. The destruction of the temple, if God takes the Jewish people out, the first thing he tells them is, when the first commandments we have after Har Sinai is V'asuli migdash v'shachanti b'sochem. I'm going to build me a temple. I should live amongst you. And when that's destroyed, it doesn't just go unnoticed in the world. It's not that God destroyed his temple and everything's back. Everything's running as if it was running before. He says the color of the sky changed. The sky was never the same color as it was in times of the temple. Tastes of fruit changed. Drinks changed. There were certain things that the shomer was no longer there. The world wasn't the same. The world was totally downgraded to the level it was in the times of the temple, because you can't just, temple doesn't just get destroyed and everyone continues on the life. That's a thing we're used to today. Like people, you read news, something's happened. And everyone goes, okay, so it happened. I'm so sorry that it happened. And everyone moves on. You don't just move on from things. So even God's world changed with the destruction of the temple. So he says the sweet honey, which was evidently something very tasteful, no longer was around. And not only that, the people who really believed were no longer amongst the Jewish people. And he brings a verse to support that. Ashia Hashem ki gomer chassid. There's no more, help us God. There's no more chassid. There's no more someone who's a righteous, a pious person. So the Gemara continues. Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer. Reb Shimon, the son of Gamliel, says, and he says in the name of his teacher Rabbi Yeshua, Miyom Shachar Beis HaMikdash, from the day the temple was destroyed, Ein Yom She'ein Bei Kloila. There's no day that the world's not cursed. So this idea of blessing in the world was totally downgraded with the destruction of the temple. So much so that every day has its own curse. Layard Datal Levracha. Dew that falls used to fall in the way of blessing. What do we say in our davening? It's not Evinus Achaz, but Arnus Achaz. We're saying Tal of Bracha. That Tal should come down Levracha for blessing. The Tal didn't come down in the same blessing. The dew didn't come down in the same blessing. We need to Tama Peiros. I'm not sure if it's connected. It could be that the dew gave the taste to the fruit, but the fruit didn't taste the same. They say, talking to someone, he says that when the resurrection of the dead, they're going to have, of course, the feast of, everyone's going to have the feast of Yasin, and they're going to bring the fruits and the vegetables of today's day with all the chemicals and sprays and what have you, and that they're doing in the ground. They're not going to taste like anything. And people then taste, they had organic and fresh fruit. But even the fruit after the time of the destruction of the temple was no longer the same fruit. It didn't have the same taste. Rabbi Yossi says there was a concept called Shuman HaPeiros, the fat of the fruit. The fat of the fruit was no longer there after the destruction of the temple. The son of Shimon, the son of Elazar, says, Hatahara notla es hatam v'sareach. The fact that there's a lack of impurity took away the ability to taste and smell. Hamaisrus notla is Shuman hadagon. And the fact that people stopped tithing took away the fat of the grain. And the answer, and the rabbi's answer said, "Aznus v'akshafim kilu es hakoil." When people started to bring in witchcraft and houses of prostitution, that also took away everything. So basically, we had a world that God gave us, and with the destruction of things, we no longer have the blessings that we had once upon a time. So you have to understand the good. We're not just not looking to depress anyone. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, actually, the Gemara in Sotah, what we're learning in that, this Gemara is actually, Rebbe always would quote it all the time. Rebbe would say that we've passed all the signs, because the Gemara in Sotah tells us all the horrible things that are going to happen, and they all happen. So now we're ready for Mashiach. Everything, we passed all that. But the good news is that when Mashiach comes, it's going to all come back. The sky will look bright. The fruits will taste nice. The honey will be there. The shomer, I guess, will have to be there. Other things that we've lost with the destruction will come back to us. All right. Now the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says that how do we know that they stopped allowing music from the destruction, from when the Sanhedrin was no longer functioning? So Amar Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yeshua. Rav Huna says in the name of the son of Rav Yeshua that we have a verse that the elders have ceased from the gate, referring to the Sanhedrin, and the young men from their music. If there's no more elders at the gate monitoring the behavior of the young men, they don't sing. They don't sing. And by the way, it's from here we see that music is something holy. And if you don't know how to use the music as a very strong tool. So if you have it in a way that you could bring holiness, good. If you don't have holiness, then the rabbi said, better don't sing. Better don't sing if it's going to bring to behaviors that are not appropriate. We're going to get to that right now. So they say like this: Amar of Rav, the famous Rav, Udna is an ear, a very extreme. A ear that listens to inappropriate music should be uprooted. You don't deserve your hearing if you're using it for zimra bebeisa chorba beseifa. If you have music in a house, it's going to bring destruction at the end of the house. It says, how do we know? It says, Kol yishayr b'chalon, koyr b'saf ki arza eira. He brings a pasuk, voices shall sing in the windows, and then you're going to have that there's going to be destruction even by the cedar. Arza eira means the cedar houses are going to also be destroyed. How? So they say it's going to bring destruction to the houses. The Gemara asks, what's arza eira? What does it mean? What does it mean? This for the cedar work shall be uncovered. Rabbi Yitzchak says, "Bayis hamasubach ba'arazim iru," that he says that for its cedar work shall be its city. Even a house that's so strong that has cedar wood in it will become rotten, because others say it's going to be rotten by forces or by worms, wood worms. Rashi says, from this we see that where is the destruction of a house? It starts from the doorpost. The doorpost says from threshold. Sorry, there's a destruction by the threshold. Others say it says Ushiya Yukar Shar. Shiya is a demon or a worm is going to break the gates through the threshold. Ravashi says he saw one of these woodworms, and they destroy like a raging ox. So basically, what do you see from here? That music is not something that the rabbis wanted people to do. Okay, again, inappropriate music. The Gemara continues. Amar Rav Huna, who asked about ladies singing. I say like this: if you have, everyone the old movies where they had the chain gangs. So they have the chain gangs in the south, and they're all singing songs. So that was not a new idea. That was the Gemara times as well. The Gemara says, "Amar Rav Huna, Zimra din agode devakare shari." The songs that would help pull the ships with the ropes, or the herd to move the herd. You could have so to say, motivational music. So, which would, by the way, possibly allow for music during working out. Means if you're working out to music, some people need to work out to rhythm. So it could be possibly based on this Gemara that it said that for moving the boats for the rhythm of things, they allowed music.
Take your mind off the fact of what you're doing.
Could be.
But there, obviously, we'd be listening to recorded music when we're on the elliptical. But this is talking about live music.
Live music, yeah. Now, but not every kind of work is allowed. The gardae, the women that were weaving or would weave in groups, they didn't let them sing songs. So the girls that were weaving, that was forbidden. The men that were schlepping, wherever they're schlepping, the boats that you need, it's hard work. That's why I'm assuming that working out, which is difficult, like Ronnie says, you want to forget that you're working out, the helping out with the rhythm, possibly that would be more something lenient. Rav Huna Batal Zimra. Rav Huna says that there should be no more any kind of song. Kam meya avze bezuza omeya sa'achite bezuza v'lai boy. Because he stopped all music and singing, that there was such availability of material of foods that the ducks and the wheat were at a cheap price at a zuz, and people didn't even want to buy it because they had so much. It means they dropped the prices of the raw foods, but people didn't find any buyers because no one needed it. Everyone had enough food. Rav Chizda was kind of more lax about music, and it affected immediately the economics of the time. Even if you wanted to buy a duck, you couldn't afford it. There was nothing to be found. So what do we see? That when the rabbis institute something, or if the Torah forbids something, depending if it comes from the pasuk, then it brings blessing. And if you don't do it, it doesn't bring blessing, or it brings the opposite of blessing. That's what happened in the times of the Talmud. The Gemara continues and says, Amr Rav Yosef, Zamrei Gavrei va'onei Noshe Pritzusa. If a man is singing, a man sings and a woman responds, so it's considered pritzus, which is lewd behavior. But Zamrei Noshe, if a woman is singing, va'onei Gavri, and a man answers, kind of, I guess they had songs then. You know, you have like a guy who's today you go to concerts where the lead singer is singing and wants to engage the crowd. So you sing and you have people respond and lean and kind of it's a back and forth between the singer and the listener. So if a woman's singing and men are responding, so it's like then he says it's even worse. He says it's like fire to chips of wood. If you can't get rid of both, better have the woman. That's your question. Better the woman not sing, because it's more forbidden. It's an erva, where then the men not singing in front of the woman, where again it's bad but not as bad. Okay, so what do we learn from this Gemara actually? And actually halacha, it brings down, they asked about the woman weaving, and this is a general halacha that's a very hard law to deal with, and that is, there's a halacha that brings down to many things, that if you know no one's going to listen, then don't say it. Like if you're gonna walk in, you know how people like to announce things. You know, everyone's doing something, say, no, the law is you can't do this. And just announce it. And no one's going to pay attention anyways. So now, the Rambam actually quotes this to the law. That if you know, let's say, he talks about the law on Shabbos, certain laws on Shabbos even, that the woman shouldn't be doing certain things, or no one should be doing them, but the women sometimes do it, then it's better not to say anything. Because at least, if they're going to do it anyways, let them have a lack of knowledge about the prohibitions and telling them exactly what they're doing wrong. They're not going to listen anyways, and now they're going to be doing something amazing, something intentionally wrong. Same thing it's brought down about the music. That if it's something that the people are not going to listen to anyways, so just be quiet about it. Although we're having a shir about it now, but we're learning the Gemara. But if you're going to start telling people strict and say that, so he's talking about specifically the women that are weaving. If you know, to send the mashgiach there that says not let the women sing, he says that's not something that's also out of line. Okay. The Gemara says this: Kol ha'shoyse arba minei zemer mevi chamish pranis leilam. There's also those days, and it's brought down that the instruments that were used for music will bring 5 different atrocities that's going to come to the people. Like it says, "Hoy mashkim v'boiker shecher." The people wake up in the morning and drink. Yudoifu machrein b'neshef yain yadlikim v'hoy kiner v'nevel toif v'chadol. You mentioned 4 instruments. Now it's not just the 4 instruments, but because these are the 4 primary instruments. Harp, a navel is another kind of. What's a navel in English? It's also harp.
Nor the violin.
Kinnor is a violin. Okay, the harp. Tof is a drum, and a chalil is a flute, some type of flute. So those are the main instruments. That they're drinking wine and therefore they're not paying attention to God with the music. Again, it seems like the music then was a way of being inappropriate. When it talks, it's funny. There's a crazy law the Rambam writes. We have the law of yayin nesach. You know what yayin nesach is? Yayin nesach is that non-mevushal wine can't be touched by a non-Jew. Can't be touched by even a person who's not Shomer Shabbos. They can't open it for you. Someone took us out to the hotel for Yom Tov. So someone asked one of the waiters to open the wine. He said, "I'm not allowed to open the wine. You're not allowed to open a wine if it's not mevushal." Now, in the laws of the Rambam writes a crazy scenario. It doesn't say why. It doesn't say what the situation is. He writes, what about if it's a house of prostitution and the woman is giving out wine and she isn't Jewish? Could you drink the wine? Like halacha, you're sitting at an inappropriate, obviously, setting.
What's the yain lo wine?
I'm not sure how they do it, but it's mevushal is the only wine that's forbidden is the wine that they would pour on the altar, or the altar even of the Avodah Zarah, of the idols. So the custom was they didn't use mevushal wine. I don't know exactly how. I'm not a winemaker, but I think there's some sort of boiling of the wine. Okay, so the Rambam writes that. It means, what's the halacha? Are you allowed to drink a wine if one of these women give you a cup of wine? Or if the woman's a Jewish woman and she's dancing in front of Gentiles, is she allowed to take a glass of wine if they give her a glass of wine? What do we see from this law? We see from this law that things were kind of a little bit, maybe sometimes a little out of hand, out of control, where they're dealing with halacha as a question. A person sitting at such a setting is allowed to drink the wine that they're giving out, So same thing over here. It could be the music then was different than it's today. Maybe it was more,
Just simply say, what? Are you asking me about wine and you're sitting in this toilet?
That's what I'm saying. So what do we have? Because the people were drinking wine and singing music and forgetting about Hashem, and they went to exile. It causes exile. And the righteous people die of starvation. Brings ra'av, brings starvation, it brings famine. People are thirsty. It also causes people to forget their Torah study with all this behavior. It brings God down. When it says v'yishbal ish, got from the word shafel, to lower ish. Who's ish? Ein ish el HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Hashem. It says Hashem ish v'chama. Ve'ein goyvim tishapalna, and the people that are elevated are lowered. Shegoyim mishifla shel Yisrael. So there's certain things that is beneath the Jewish people. And when we institute these kind of ideas to the Jewish people, like the music in an appropriate way, it lowers everything. It lowers the standards of the Jewish people. That's what we see from this Gemara. This Gemara we see from here is that the rabbis wanted, especially going into exile, especially with the destruction of the Sanhedrin, that we could have got lost. We could have got lost. The Jewish, they right away instituted certain things that we say that's not the way a Jew behaves. It's not a Jewish thing to do. We don't have parties like this. We don't behave this way. Our music is not like their music, and our gatherings are not like their gatherings. And this will keep things in some sort of order. Okay. Now we're gonna just go a little further. We have a few more minutes. Let's try to get about the prophets, who these prophets were. Let's skip down. When the early prophets died, the Urim V'Tumim no longer functioned. The Urim V'Tumim again was the breastplate that answered. Who are the Nevi'im Rishonim? Who are the first prophets? Man Nevi'im Rishonim. When did the Urim V'Tumim stop functioning? Omer Rav Huna. The Rav Huna says, David, Shmuel, or Shlomo. What's the obvious question just in that piece of that line? David, Shmuel, and Shlomo. The order, right? It should say Shmuel, David, and Shlomo. Shmuel was before. Shmuel was the prophet. He was the one who anointed Saul and then later anointed David. He didn't even live to see David as king. So what do we see from here? Just a side note that just out of respect of David HaMelech, he gets mentioned first. So David, Shmuel, and Shlomo, but in the days of David, Shlomo, and Shmuel, he's the king. That's when they stopped functioning, after they died. So that means after Shlomo Melech, which was 20, how many years was Shlomo king? 35 years, maybe 40 years, whatever it was. And he didn't build the temple right away. It took him 7 years. We're talking about only within the first 50 years of the temple, one of the main things of the temple was non-functioning, which is the Urim V'Tumim. He no longer had the answer from God through the breastplate, according to the initial thinking of the Talmud. Rav Nachman Amid, and even Rav Nachman says even stronger. They made David zimnim salik v'zimnim loisalik. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. David HaMelech. Let's talk a little about David. His Yortzeit was this past week. David HaMelech. When you read Tehillim and you read the strength of David and the compassion of David and the understanding of David, that doesn't belittle his ability to be in charge, to be king, to rule. So even you have to remember, there were 2 sons of Aaron that survived after his first 2 sons were killed. Who are the 2 sons? Elazar and Itamar. Elazar is the high priest after Aaron dies. Who's the high priest after Elazar? His son Pinchas. Pinchas lives a very long time. We don't know. Pinchas could have lived all the way to Eli. So Pinchas, because in the Torah of Torah, it's Pinchas Eli. So and Eli is until the time of Samuel. He's the one who is Samuel's teacher. So after Eli till David HaMelech is maybe 50 years or so. So who's the high priest afterwards are still descendants of Elazar, the older of the 2 sons. David HaMelech has a situation. Why? Shari Shaul Tzaddik V'Otzalai. Shaul Evyasir V'Layosila. Evyatar was a Kohen Gadol, was a high priest. When David is running away from his son Avshalom, again, even to do something like that, he's in a crisis. His son wants to kill him. His son has the people on his side, or at least a team of people on his side. It's a dangerous war for David. He doesn't know what to do. So he goes to the high priest, who is Evyatar, and he asks him, what do I do? But there was a way how to ask. It wasn't just you ask questions. You had to know you had to give God choices. You couldn't just say, what do I do? You had to say, do I run away? Don't I run away? Do I leave Jerusalem? Don't I run? David had to leave his capital. That's a big deal. He's the king. So he asks Abiatar, and he doesn't get answered. Immediately, David demotes him. He's no longer high priest. Because he literally took it away from Abiatar and his family. He promotes Sadok to become high priest, and Sadok gets the answer that he should leave Jerusalem. But I mean, if David sees that you're not, he has zero tolerance, right? If you're not able to function as high priest, he dismisses you. You're no longer high priest. So we see that even in David's times, it wasn't always functioning. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it doesn't work. Also, Aviatar went up and he tried to get an answer and it didn't answer him. Rashi says this story happened when he was running away, like I said, from Avshalom. I'm not sure where. It seems like Rashi says he went to Male Hazesim. I'm assuming Male Hazesim would be the elevation of the olives would be Mount of Olives. So David leaves. So we're right here, right? We're in ground zero of the story. David's here because this is around where David is. He's being pursued by his son. He runs to the Mount of Olives, which is not far, right? I know we could just, even today, we could walk to the Mount of Olives from here. He walks to the Mount of Olives. He asks God if he should run away, and he asked the Urim V'Tumim. And it says, Rashi says, and he puts Sadak, and Sadak was from the family, I think, of Itamar, and that's when it switched over from the 2 sons of Aaron, that they no longer was it only belonging, the high priest was only belonging to the descendants of Elazar, which is actually an interesting thing if you think about it, because it's 500 years, so 400 years from an Aaron, the high priest is priest, and he has 2 sons, and it doesn't say anywhere in the Torah that Elazar is the one who's the high priest. He himself is, but it doesn't say that his descendants get it over Itamar, just makes him the high priest. But there is a concept that there's a Yerusha. This is one of the things we learned, that if you have a son that's qualified, he should inherit your position. A lot of people have issues when a rabbi hires his son to take over as him as a second rabbi or the succeeding rabbi. But this halacha says that Halacha says if you have a son, your son has the right. That's why the kings were son after father, and that's why the rebbes were son after father, and that's why in others in Rosh Yeshivas and Yeshivas. I'm not sure. There's a yeshiva over here in the old city that they had a whole discussion who's going to take over from the Rosh Yeshiva when he passed away, because there's succession. There's certain rules in Torah. So there was the succession for the high priest Elazar, but when he comes, he can't function. David demotes him, and he gives it over to the next family.
Hello, Moshe Rabbeinu.
He didn't give it to
him. I'm just saying, it's like, why would anybody take issue?
It's a very good point. Moshe Rabbeinu actually wanted his son to take over. When Moshe saw that Aaron's son took over, he wanted his son. And God says, no, it's Joshua. Why? Because Joshua did the time. He stood next to Moshe. He never left him. It doesn't say that about Moshe's kids. I'm not saying they were bad people, but Joshua did the time. He never left the tent. Let's just do one little piece of Gemara before we finish. Rabbi Bashmuel, v'yihi lidor shelikim b'mei Zechariah, amevim b'roi selikim. The pasuk teaches us by Zechariah. Zechariah was a prophet later, in the middle of the first temple. My lav v'urim loy b'nevim. So the Gemara says we see clearly that he asked. So we see that Urim v'tumim was still giving answers well into the first temple. So they say, no, he asked the prophets. He didn't ask the Urim v'tumim. So we see clearly that there's different ways of getting information from God. I'll stop over here in the Gemara, because the Gemara continues basically that there's the highest level of communicating with God post Moshe Rabbeinu was the Urim v'tumim. Urim v'tumim is that you spoke to the high priest. The high priest had to have prophecy. We're not sure how it worked. There's a lot of discussions. That's the highest level of communication to God. Under that would be prophets. Where the prophets come, and like the prophets, even days of David, were telling him what he should do, what he shouldn't do. The prophets, definitely in the time of the second temple, at the destruction of the first temple, were telling. King Yeshayahu went to war against Egypt. The prophet told him not to do it. So he was getting information from God, but not through the Urim v'tumim, but through the prophet. Later, they say that prophecy was no longer there, but they had what's called baskol. Everyone heard of baskol? Baskol means a voice from heaven, but actually the actual translation, an echo. Baskol is like an echo. So it would come down, a voice would come down from heaven that they would pay attention to, and they would use it. They said they would use the baskol, and the Gemara tells us the baskol would tell us different things. Sometimes we hear it, sometimes we don't hear it, but the baskol would say different things like Hillel is the great, or Shmuel the small is great, and then later we had what's called Ruach HaKodesh. And so to finish off, the Rabbi actually writes in Hayom Yom that up until the Shachantaz, which is maybe the year 15 something, all the responsa and sections of the Shulchan Aruch were written with Ruach HaKodesh. So that's another level of divine inspiration, that it's not just someone talking, but there's inspiration from the divine, but there's levels. There's Ruach HaKodesh, there's prophecy, there's baskol, there's the Urim v'tumim, seemingly is the highest of all the three. All right, everyone. Yom Tov, Shavua Tov, and have a wonderful rest.